All right, it's about that time. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Samantha, welcome. Anybody else jumps in on the call, we can hop in, and all you have to do to put messages in is just scroll over the screen, and you'll have some icons pop up, and you want to select chat and place your message down in the corner. Make sure it's going to everyone and not just panelists. And the webinar today was titled Overwhelmed, and it had to do with overcoming the guilt and chaos of not being organized so that you can, put together a daily plan of action. So we're going to be conquering that guilt and chaos that comes and it produces overwhelm. And I want to talk a moment about the problem before we get into the solution. I was thinking about this as we were getting ready. Oh, hey, welcome in, Melissa. Welcome, Jill. Just getting ready. I was just starting out. I'm going to have, if I sound a little raspy today, I've got, I had a cold over the weekend. So let me suck down a little hot tea and see if that doesn't help. I've been hydrating all morning trying to get my voice in a better place, but it is just not there. So make sure that, all right, folks are piling in now here as we hit the 11 o'clock hour. Vicki, welcome back. Diane, welcome. Good to see you all. Hey, for those of you who don't know me, I think many of you do. Hey, Ab, it's good to see you. It's John Arnold. And I'm John Arnold, and I'm the Chief Inspiration Officer of the 7-Minute Life. And I was just saying, as people started coming in, that we're going to be tackling this sense of overwhelm. And I'm kind of going to back up a little bit and get at some pretty fundamental things today. And I think we're going to have a small group today. I may be surprised. A lot of times we get an explosion of folks in the last minute. But if we do, I'll really slow it down and we can handle a lot of questions you have. But I did something for this webinar that Allyson often does, and I don't slow down to do. She loves looking at the meaning of words. And I thought, I'm going to look up overwhelm and see what some definitions are of it. And what came out again and again when it talked about overwhelm was feeling as if you had too many things on top of you. It would talk about being buried under or covered over with too many things. That's what the definitions kept saying. And so when I was thinking about that, to me, I had this picture almost in my mind of, here I am ready to do my work every day, and I have on top of me this huge pile of chaotic mess of to-dos and papers and tasks and all kinds of stuff, and it's just weighing me down. That to me is the image of overwhelm when I think about the definition of it. Anybody relate to that? Man, I can. So I definitely can. This idea that we have all these things piled on top of us, and there are too many of them. And that's I think what I want to get into here today is, first off, there's too many, all right? And we need to figure out how to cut through the noise of that. Hang on a minute. Rookie mistake. Forgot to turn my phone off. But we have, here we go. Sorry about the interruption. Yeah, it's like a ton of bricks and they're ready to crash down on us, and it's pushing down on us. And there's too many things. That's one part of the problem. And the other problem is, I bet you can guess, is our position. It's all on top of us, right? It feels like it's crushing us. And I think the real key, what I realized as I looked at this definition of overwhelm, of there being too many things and it all on top of us, that what happens is we need to invert that picture if we want to get rid of being overwhelmed. What we have to do is we have to get on top of it instead. Let me draw me here. I'm going to put some victorious little hands up in the air. We want to get on top of it, and instead of this chaotic mess, we want hopefully something that is more like a realistic and orderly stack that we're on top of. Does that make sense? I mean, it's almost simplistic, but we need to get simplistic if we want to get out of being overwhelmed. So we've got to limit what's coming at us. We have to organize it. We have to simplify it so that we can get on top of it and feel that we're on top of it and directing what's going on with it, instead of it being on top of us. So that's what we need to dive into today. A lot of you guys have been in here again and again. If you're new to the call, let me give you a quick intro to using the chat. Scroll over the screen, click on the chat bar, and make sure that your comments are going to everyone and not just to the panelist, me. Again, I'm John Arnold, Chief Inspiration Officer at 7 Minute Life. So really pumped up and excited as we plow into this today. Because I don't know about you, but I don't like having days where this is what it feels like, where I have this chaotic mess that's sitting on top of me, weighing me down. And actually, when I talk to people, they literally, that's the kind of terms that they use. They say, I feel weighed down. I feel pressed upon. I feel covered over. And that's exactly what they're sensing, is all of these things that are piled on top of them. So we've got to figure out how to cut through the noise. Ab said, amen. So, all right, I almost hate to erase this, but I am going to erase it. And I want us to delve into solutions this morning. And there's a little, the philosophy behind the 7 Minute Life is that if we want to live a life that's meaningful, if we want to escape that overwhelm, that we have to do 3 things. And I want to get back to the basics today of what those 3 things are and some of the common mistakes people make around those 3 things. And here's what they are. And we've got a great little graphic around it. But the 3 things are: we need to prioritize, we need to organize. Hope I might have enough room here. And we need to simplify. Oh, that's going to be perfect. Prioritize, organize, and simplify. All right? So, excuse me, fighting this cold still. I might do a little bit of that coughing throughout this. I'm sorry about that. There's a lot of common mistakes people make when they prioritize, organize, and simplify. We all start from, or I think most of us start from, a to-do list, right? And I bet you guys, we've talked about these, those of you who've been on before many times. We have these long, huge, bottomless to-do lists, and that's part of what makes us feel like we're that little guy stacked under all of those papers or those tasks and projects that are hanging over our head. So we start with our to-do list, and usually, I'll tell you the mistake I used to make is when I would start to make my to-do list, I would begin by listing literally like anything and everything I had to work on, okay? I really wasn't creating a to-do list for the day. I was creating a list of everything that wasn't finished in my life, what we call unfinished tasks. But I was putting them all down as if it's stuff that I might need to work on today. That alone was an exercise in making myself overwhelmed, because I wasn't being realistic about what I could do in the day. We'll get to that when we get to simplifying here in a minute about how we whittle that down a little bit. But what we need to do is when we get that initial to-do list in front of us, and you do need one of those, you do need to kind of brain dump, and we advise every evening taking 7 minutes and every morning taking 7 minutes to do some planning. That's the cornerstone behind getting organized and doing this work of prioritizing, organizing, and simplifying. Taking 7 minutes in the morning and 7 minutes in the evening. And I often use my 7 minutes at night to brain dump what I'm going to need to work on the next day, or to look at things that are lingering out there on my unfinished task. What most people think of as their to-do lists. And then once I have that in front of me, here's the key that I want to say. There's two things I want you to understand about prioritizing so that you can escape some of this overwhelm. All right, there's two levels of prioritizing. One is what I call pre-list. Pre-list prioritizing. Pre-list prioritizing. With a pre-list prioritize, what I mean by that is we need to take time to figure out what is important to us even before we have a list, so that we have something we can use as a filter for our list. So here's specifically what we use as those three filters that are what I call pre-list prioritizing. One is knowing your highest values. Knowing your highest values. The other is knowing your purpose. And lastly, knowing your goals. And those are intimately tied together. So knowing your highest values, knowing your purpose, and knowing your goals. Now, those of you who use a 7-Minute Life Daily Planner, that's why we have at the beginning of these, and we advise everybody in the first, at the beginning of every 90 days, to go through exercise where, like here, I figured out and discovered my purpose, wrote it out. Here I had goals that I created. And before that, I had priorities that I figured out. And those worksheets are available on our website, or you can use the 7-Minute Life Daily Planner. But you want every 90 days to make sure you come up with your highest values, your purpose, and your goals, because they're going to be the litmus test that you're going to use when you're looking at your to-do list to know what to do. And let me highlight this word, first. I'll come back to why I highlighted that word in a moment. But when we prioritize, there is some prioritization work that we need to do before we ever have a list. And that is, we need to know our values, know our purpose, and know our goals so that they can be a funnel by which we can make meaningful decisions around how we're going to spend our time. Well, let me pause and see if there's any questions about that, and welcome other people who've come on the call. So, hey guys, welcome in. I see some other people who popped on while I was talking. Hey, thank you, Samantha. Samantha sent a link to where the worksheets are, where the tools are. Any questions so far about this? And make sure, if you can, that your comments are coming through the chat. Let's see. I'm not seeing any questions so far, but I'll keep looking back and I'll asking you. I'm hoping that means that this totally makes sense, but we've got to have this as a filter. And I'll be honest, I used to be really bad about, when I first started using a planner, I would do these exercises and then I kind of shoved them to the side and I started using my daily plan, but I never went back to that stuff. And once we have this in mind, once we know those three things, our highest values, our purpose, and goals, we can then use those to prioritize what's on our to-do list. And you don't, let's say you have 35 tasks. I don't want you to necessarily look down your list and let's say, I'll use for illustration a dozen of them. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, we have, let's say you have a dozen things on your list. Here's what I would advise for prioritizing. You're probably not going to get to all 12 of those. If you have 38 things on your list, you're probably not going to get to all 38, right? Okay. How many of you have a to-do list where you know good and well you're not going to get to the bottom of the list on that day? How many of you will admit that? I do many times. Yes, as Samantha says, doesn't everyone? Really common problem. We have a list that we know we can't get to. Now, when I say prioritize your list, this is on, post list prioritizing, if you will. So this is when you're doing your list. I'll call it post list. Now that you have a list in front of you, you're prioritizing it. What I'm not saying is that you need to take all 12 items and find out from 1 to 12 what order they should be tackled in. There's no use in doing that because you're never going to get through all 12 probably, right? Here's what I mean by prioritizing, is what we mean by this in the 7-minute life by prioritizing. I want you to look through that list, and when you look through that list, decide out of those 12 items or 20 or 25 or 30 or whatever it is, just 5 items, okay? 5 items that are the most important, and those 5 will go to the top of the list. Now, don't worry about these for a moment, okay? We'll get there, all right? But trust me on this. Identify just those 5. You don't have to worry about prioritizing all of this yet, okay? I mean, if you do know some of these things need to go before others and you want to bump them up, that's fine. But what you want to do is find your highest priorities. And these highest priorities, these 5, need to be high value. And I define value kind of quantitatively and qualitatively. And here's what I mean by that. Quantitatively, I look for activities that are going to give me the best results. There are some activities we invest ourselves in that don't yield a lot of result. And those we want to consider lower value and bump them down the list. We want to do things that are going to move a needle forward, create progress, cause us to get things done first, okay? So high value is going to be based off of 2 things. I'm going to put HV, high value, is going to equal things that yield results, okay? And the other piece of that high value is that are rich in meaning for us. They're meaningful to us. They're important to us. They matter to our priorities. They matter to our purpose. They matter to our goals. Those 3 things that I talked about, purpose, priorities, and goals, we're using those to determine what's most meaningful and what yields the most results. If one of these 5 doesn't tie into your priorities, purpose, or goals, you really got to question kind of why it's in there on your top 5. Now remember, we're just talking about 5 things. And also, here's the other thing I want to emphasize. You need to make sure that each of these 5 things is a task only and not a project. It's something actually that you can complete all in one sitting, preferably under 20 minutes, because that's what our attention span will go. That it's a task, not a project, so it's not multiple steps of things, and that it is high value. Now, saying that, let's say there's, some of these things, I said no more than 20 minutes. If all of them took 20 minutes, let's say at the max, if all of these things took 20 minutes, what we'd be looking at 100 minutes, about an hour and a half of your day, roughly, okay? A little more than an hour and a half of your day. Odds are, if you're doing work well on creating a to-do list of actionable items, and you have honed these down to actions that are kind of micro actions or small steps that move you forward, they're meaningfully, that, you know, some of these may take only 5 or 10 minutes. People start getting panicky about all of this when I say, you know, pick 5 things and put them first. But it's going to take tops about an hour and a half on these if they're truly tasked. And if they're not, you need to break them down until they are. And if some of them are just a few minutes, or let's say max they take 5 or 10 minutes apiece, we might be looking at a half hour to an hour of work here. A half hour, an hour to work, and you have all the rest of the day, all right? Now, we advise trying to get these 5 done before 11. Those of you who've been in here many times before, we talk about having a 5 before 11 list. And I hope you're seeing now why it's important in terms of prioritizing and getting things to the top. People, as I say, get panicky about the rest of the stuff. Here's the promise I want to make to you, because I've seen this work for me and a bunch of other people. When they will start doing 5 high-value tasks and they get those done first ahead of everything else, you know, if 11 o'clock doesn't work for you and you need to do something else because your lifestyle is a night lifestyle or whatever, the key is just making sure they're done first. What happens is you start feeling accomplishment. You start feeling not so much under that stack, but at least on top of part of that stack, and that you're in control of it, and you're doing things based off of your desires and not just the expectations of other people or what's urgent or what's on fire. What's urgent or what's on fire should not necessarily dictate what those 5 things are. Now, I will say, I know the way life is, and there are going to be times, of course, there are urgent emergency things that are going to cram those 5 before 11 out of the way. But you want to do everything you can to treat your 5 before 11 almost like an appointment you have that you cannot miss. And what happens is it just unleashes a tremendous amount of energy when you start feeling less overwhelmed. Because let's face it, when we get overwhelmed, what do we start to do? We start to procrastinate. When we get overwhelmed, we slow down. There's actual research that shows that psychologically and physically, we slow down when we get overwhelmed, and we have trouble making decisions, and we make decisions more poorly. So what I'm getting at is, while this will feel risky to some of you because you're nervous about all these other little things and when am I going to get them done, well, you're going to get them done after that half hour to an hour or however long it takes you to get your 5 before 11. But I'm telling you, if you do this regularly, the shift it makes in your attitude about the work that you have to do and your experience of the work you have to do and the experience of your day, it's going to redeem time to where you'll actually get more of these low-value tasks done. You'll have more energy for them. And the more you do this, the more you'll realize some of these low-value tasks probably shouldn't even be on your list. And you'll feel the freedom to let go of them because you'll realize that many of these are costing you what matters much more to you and brings more joy and results in your life. So again, I'm going to pause there. I want to make sure, see if we have any questions going on. So, and welcome to anybody who came in a little late. Got a great call here today. Allyson is on the road. For those of you who came in, I'm John Arnold and the Chief Inspiration Officer of the 7-Minute Life. And if I sound a little funny today, I had a really bad, nasty cold this weekend, and I'm kind of getting over it. So, okay. Jill Key asked a really important question. Where do you store the unfinished task list? I'm going to give you 2 answers to that, okay? Well, I'll actually give you, I have a couple places. At the beginning of 90 days, I actually use the worksheets in the front of the planner, and we have in there just a long, long, long page of unfinished tasks. And I'm having trouble flipping to it. And at the beginning of 90 days, I take anything, I'll show you a blank one. There's a blank one. That's unfinished work task. Here's one where I had a bunch of things that I had jotted down on an old list where I had placed all the things. These were unfinished home tasks. I have a similar unfinished work task page. And so I'll brain dump them at the beginning of 90 days. When I do my daily, planning, I actually use a big piece of scrap paper, and I create one. I kind of do a weekly one. I'll take at the beginning of the week, because I have a Monday review where I try to sit down and kind of project what I'm going to need to tackle during the week. And I will write out just kind of a master list of everything that I might need to jump on during the week. And I kind of have that as a pool to pull from. And as I complete things, I'll cross them off that. You can use an unfinished task list there. And then I also, in terms of some unfinished tasks, and during the day on the daily planner pages, for those of you who use this, or if you're going to download it and use it, you'll notice this piece called unfinished task here. There's 5 before 11 at the top, and I fill that out first. And then there's unfinished tasks down here. Okay, the 5 before 11 is obviously this. Now this unfinished task, I use that in 2 ways. Sometimes I put things on there from my, I'll call it my master list of unfinished tasks, my pool list, if you will. I'll put some on there that I want to tackle that day. Okay, so I put them on there like a to-do that I want to tackle once I get over my 5 before 11. So, you know, that might be something from lower, it might be something that's here, and I give it a little bit more priority by putting it on this unfinished task list and drawing some attention to it. I also have this task here as or this part of the page for me is a catch place, because throughout the day, little things are going to come up that are unfinished tasks, and you need some place where you're capturing them as the day goes by, and you can kind of revisit before the end of the day or pick them up the next day. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, I'm working on a project and I get a phone call, or I call somebody about a detail in the project, and I realize out of that I'm going to have to call someone else, but I don't have time to call that person. That now becomes something that I need to do that's an unfinished task, a returned call that I'm going to need to get completed. It's kind of a to-do, but some of those are things that in the day, as things pop up that I get interrupted on and I need to go back to, I'll put them here, and I'll check it at the end of the day, and I'll check it the next day to see if something needs to be attended to. And I do that so that I don't have things get lost or become unfinished tasks that pile on my master list and stay there forever and ever. So, you know, you kind of need a master list that you're going to as a pool to attend to. And I like to keep that very separate. I don't want to do that every day, because I don't want to go into the day feeling like, you know, what I have is stuff that needs to be worked on over the next 6 months, and I'm looking at it all like it's got to happen today. That's so demoralizing, you know. So I go and I cherry pick a few things off that master list to create my to-do list. Then I prioritize 5 before 11. Then I'll pick some things that are unfinished tasks or new tasks to populate this down here. Does that make some sense? I usually don't break my master list down into micro actions. That usually happens when I am moving over. Now I will do this. I won't break it down into micro actions. Well, okay, I got to qualify this in a couple ways. When I do my 90-day one and I create that master list at the beginning, one of the things that you'll notice on the unfinished list is there's a list over here, and it has a column for action. When I do my initial list like this, I will always write down the first action step. I have my master list. What I'm finding is more and more my master list is starting to look more and more like a task list and have less projects on it. What you'll find is as you do this work, you'll naturally find yourself realizing that you're putting a project down. And you know, I do put projects down because I want to remember them, and sometimes I'll break them out a little bit. But I have found that my master list is becoming more and more almost always tasks. I just have honed that awareness where it's getting natural for me now. If I start to put something down that's not a task, to go, no, wait a minute, what's the task here that needs to be done? Is that helpful at all, Jill? Does that make sense what I'm saying there? So yes, I do. I don't have like a clean, firm rule around breaking those down. You know, I usually try to jot down the first few things that I need to do. I might have, let me see, I do a lot of that planning on whiteboard. If I have a whiteboard free with some of that, I might show you where I did a little brainstorming like that. No, I don't have a clean one right now. Sometimes I'll brainstorm that stuff on a whiteboard. I'll take a big project and I'll break it down on a whiteboard. My projects, I do break all my projects down into steps and micro steps. I do that usually on spreadsheets. Because most of my work, you're talking about, like, I do online projects and creating resources, writing things. So to me, it's pretty spreadsheetable. I don't do that, say, for like a home project. I don't have a spreadsheet on how I'm going to clean my garage. So it varies a little bit depending on what the project is. So, okay, I hope that was helpful. Okay, it does make sense. I've been trying to figure out what to do with things that have to get done during the day that may take 4 hours but aren't high value. Oh yeah, I'm trying to think of where some good wisdom I get, because those big blocks, sometimes you really have to plan ahead to have big blocks for something like 4 hours, or you've got to chunk it down into pieces that are much lower. I'll tell you what, if you don't mind, if you have a couple examples of something a little bit more concrete, what you're talking about, I might be able to offer you a little bit better help on that. I'm gonna erase this unless people have questions. So that's kind of getting into prioritizing. And I hope you see what we were doing there. You first figure out, what are your values? What is your purpose? What are your goals? So that you have that as a litmus test to understand what the action steps are. And then you go in and you take your list, you pick out those 5 before 11, and you base that off of what's going to be quantitatively and qualitatively high value, meaning what will get results, what will be meaningful for you. Okay, thank you, Melissa. Putting together a training deck, would be designing a floor plan as a house plan designer. Okay, I will give you, yeah. Here's what I do. Now that comes out in that, these 4-hour things, like, let's see the best way for me to tell you how I tackle those things. Because I do have stuff like that. Like, for example, sometimes I need to produce video all day. And it's not there isn't anything in it that's kind of a macro action. I need to spend the morning shooting video, and it's going to be long periods of time where I'm shooting. I can break it down into like shoot, edit, but sometimes it's just I'm in front of the camera, here's take 1, oh, mess that up. Here's take 2, mess that up. This is what I do for that. When I actually schedule out my day so that I'm laying out like, like on a 15-minute time increment sheet, or when I'm putting it in, more and more I'm using the 15-minute time increment sheet that we have. But let's say I'm just, let's say you're using, I don't know what you're using, if you're using the planner or if you're using some other calendaring tool. But when I'm laying out my day, I'll set aside a block for, say, 2 hours in the morning from 9 to 11. I've got to be shooting video, okay? I will say this, though, and this helps me not be so overwhelmed and be more productive with those large blocks of time. I use Pomodoro Technique, which I have mentioned in other webinars, which is simply working with a timer. And you work I use usually 20-minute intervals with a 5-minute break, or some people do 25, 5. A lot of people do 50, 10. I tend to do 20 or 25-minute blocks with a 5-minute break. And this is why I do that, even if I'm doing something like video where it's all one activity, or let's say I'm writing. Like when I was writing my first book, I would perpetually do this. I'd set a timer for 25 minutes, write for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. Our attention begins to wane after 20 minutes and we get less productive. And we get what's called decision fatigue if we're having to make a lot of choices or decisions during that time. And we have to back off to be more productive. So the pauses actually help you get, like if I do 3 20-minute blocks with 2 5-minute breaks in there, I'll get far more done out of those 60 minutes than I would if I worked 60 minutes straight through. I found it true again and again. When I mentioned writing my first book, I remember going one afternoon and I went and I had lunch in a restaurant, brought my laptop, and I sat there and I flipped on my computer and I worked to a timer in the restaurant, and I worked in 20-minute intervals like that, and I stayed for about 3 hours there. I knew the ownership and stuff, and they knew what I was working on. They were fine with me hanging out there. But I worked for between 3 and 4 hours of writing, and I was not at all fatigued in doing what could have been really an onerous amount of tasks. On the other hand, I have sat down before and failed to use a timer and just piled myself in for like, an hour and a half. And by the end of the hour and a half, I'm feeling almost burned out and unable to go further. So, so that's the one piece I would have about those big things. Sometimes you do have to set aside a block of time in your schedule. You just have to carve it out like an appointment. But I would say when you do that, I would break it up into manageable chunks. Or if you're really struggling to get to it, like let's say you mentioned designing a floor plan as a house plan designer. I don't know that real well, but sometimes what you have to do is you have to say, I need to spend some time on that today, and it takes more than 20 minutes. But sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, on my 5 before 11 list, I'll put spend 20 minutes on the floor plan, and I just do a block of 20 minutes on the floor plan so that I'm nibbling away at it every day. Is that helpful at all? Okay, good. You're reading my mind because you just jumped in and said, thanks, very helpful. Okay, so most of that was about prioritizing. Organizing, the thing I want to say about organizing here is, I'm just going to say, you really need a daily written action plan. If it's not in a 7-minute planner, then you need something. You need a binder, you need it on your laptop, your phone. You need a written action plan that can be a touch point throughout the day that you can constantly turn to, and you can address you can go back and see what you're dropping or need to pick up or make adjustments in your day. So you do need a written action plan. I think that's one of the biggest things we need to do to organize. We also, I try to use only one resource as a catch. You'll notice that, like, the reason the daily action plan is broken up into a lot of sections. I keep trying to find a clean page. I should just mark one here. I'm going to do that. It's broken up into a lot of sections. The intent of this was so that you not only had something to figure out what to get done at work, but you can manage everything going on in life. But there was one spot where every note, like let's say you need to check a voicemail, you need to make an appointment, you need to write a thank you, all of those details of life, you had them kind of on a dashboard. You had them in one spot so that you're not living your life on 100 Post-it notes. Or I'll be honest, I'll show you my favorite thing, and I actually still love it, but I just know it's really bad of me to use. I love writing stuff on the back of envelopes, but I've lost so many things by putting them on the back of envelopes instead of putting them in a planner somewhere in one central spot. So 9/10 of organization is having a system that is repeatable. Here's the keys. Whether it's planner or not, I think the planner is the best way to go, but if that's not what you do, make sure that you have a repeatable process for each day of how you plan, and make sure that everything as best as possible is one spot. Now, I'm gonna say a caveat around that. Like for example, I think Allyson, I'm pretty sure Allyson uses a digital calendaring tool, but she plans her day using the planner. So you may have a digital calendar you use for tracking where you got to be when you have to be. What I mean is you have one spot that is a catch for the work of the day, what needs to be done, what you're going to have to do, what you've left undone, so that stuff's not scattered all over the place in your life. It's just so easy when you're putting everything on Post-it notes and envelopes and that kind of thing to lose some of it. So I'm going to sit down just for a moment and see what other questions we have. It's about 11:42, and I need to get a little more water in me. My throat is really having a hard time with us today. Good to have you all, by the way. Okay. All right. I'm not seeing any questions. So simplifying. You guys ready to make that pile not as big? Anybody want to see their pile get smaller? I'm waiting to see somebody, please. I hope so. Simplifying. There's a lot of simplifying that goes on in just prioritizing and getting down to the top 5 you want to have. I want to say a word about triaging your to-do list. Every once in a while, I kind of go through and I do a purge of my master list. I find there are some things on our list that cling there for months, days, weeks, years, and we really need to question whether they need to be on that list or not. Now, there's several options you have as you go through your list. I want to talk about simplifying at 2 levels once again. Let's talk about, I'll call it big picture simplifying, okay? Big picture simplifying. Big picture simplifying is when you get that, you create that big, onerous, unrealistic list. All right, most of us do that. We generate this crazy, unrealistic list of everything imaginable we could work on. I would challenge you to take that list and go down through it and look at it and earnestly ask some questions about each item on that list, once a week or so. or if nothing else, once a month. I think weekly is how it works best for me. I think you wait a month and you forget and it doesn't happen. But go down through that list, and what you're looking for are, what are things that I have put on there that I can do or could do, but I shouldn't necessarily be doing. All right. A lot of times we take on work that we shouldn't take on. And if you have a lot of shouldn't have taken on things on your list, it's symptomatic of a problem of falling into other people's expectations, not being clear on your priorities. And you need to start asking, how can I stop taking those things on my list? And are there steps I can take to get rid of those from my list? I would go through your list and see if there's anything you can cut. You know, go down through and say, what if I don't do this? I mean, if it's sat there for 6 months, what if I never get to it? Is the world going to end? Do I just need to forfeit this one and let go of it? Sometimes our ego's at stake and we just need to let go of some things. Also, what can you delegate? What can you delegate? Are there things on your list that it's really somebody else's job and you need to be handing to somebody else? Lastly, maybe you can't pass it off, but maybe you can share it. And I'll use that 2 ways. I'll put share or get help, but you just don't go it alone. Sometimes you just need help. I'll give you a wonderful example of that. I was head of a music team for a retreat weekend, and one of the responsibilities I had was I had to create the playlist for all of the music over a 4-day weekend. And we probably played, I'm not exaggerating, we probably played 120 songs or something over the course of the weekend. I mean, we're repeating some songs, but we did multiple play sets every day for 4 days straight, and an extra day on the front end where we would just do it with the staff leading worship. A huge amount of music, and I don't have a very good music memory, and I kept procrastinating it, and finally I picked up the phone and I called this buddy of mine, Bill, one of my best friends, another minister like myself, and I said, Bill, listen, I've got to create these playlists and I have trouble remembering songs, but he's like a musical encyclopedia. And so I knew like kind of the, I could tell him, well, I want some songs that have to do with forgiveness, or I want some songs that have to do with being faithful or whatever. And he would go, oh, what about this, 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 and this? And he would think of 3 or 4 things I never thought of. And I actually took and banged out that whole playlist. I don't remember how long it took, but it was probably an hour or more. But I ended up banging out the whole playlist with him, and it had sat on my desk for weeks. And it wasn't until like the director, the person who had to, not the director, but the person who had to create music slides was like almost angry at me because it was getting down to where they had to have them. And I finally swallowed my pride and I said, I need help. Once I did that, I banged it out really quickly. It was so much easier. In retrospect, he might have even just done it for me. That's funny. Who just, Ab, you said for your throat, try throat coat by Traditional Medicinals. That's what's in this cup. So, but I need to be drinking it. Let me take a big drink. Thank you. That's actually what I did last night. I probably couldn't talk if I hadn't done this already this morning. That's really funny. That's exactly what's in my cup here. All right. I appreciate the concern. Any questions about this, about cutting, delegating, sharing, getting help in order to simplify what you're doing? So this is what I call big picture simplifying. let's take it down a little bit more into the day, like your daily action plan. Simplifying your daily action plan. Once you have your list, okay, here's the list in hand. There's some things you need to do to simplify. First off, the very first thing you have to do is recognize how much of this you can or cannot get done, right? We all kind of confessed earlier that our list many times is not doable. Like we know it even from the get-go. So that being the case, let's slow down and ask ourselves, okay, how much could I realistically get done? And the way we do that is you have to look at your list, and for every item on the list, you have to estimate how much time it's going to take. So I don't know. I'm just going to call them, I'm just going to letter them A, B, C, D. Okay. So task A, we decide it's going to take 15 minutes. B is going to take an hour. Actually needs to be broken down into something else. So that we kind of got to go, okay, what can I break that down into? Or what is the first step that I can do that can actually get done? C is going to take 30 minutes. You know, D is going to take 5 minutes. E is going to take 2 minutes. Okay. We go through that list and we put a rough estimate on there of how long it's going to take. And here, if you have something that's going to be more than a task, you can either chunk it down and wipe it off and say, okay, I'm just going to do that piece, or you can list all 3 of those pieces as separate items. But you want to get at how much time is, this is your work time, okay, like honest to goodness work time. There's usually some on-ramp, off-ramp time. That's not my own term. I think I picked that up from Edmund Pagan. Like what I mean by on-ramp or off-ramp stuff is, let's say, you know, one of the things you have later in the day that you have to do is fix dinner. You know, do you have to stop by the store and get stuff? Do you have to prep? Do you have to set the table, clean up afterwards? Fixing dinner may be a lot more than just the 30 minutes it takes to do the pasta or whatever. At work, it may be that, you know, you have a meeting that's supposed to be 30 minutes with someone, but you've got to print out an agenda ahead of time, find a report and proof it before you get to the meeting. And afterwards, you know, you're going to have to do some follow-up email or take some notes down. You may find that that 30-minute meeting you put here really is, you know, 45 minutes or an hour of work. So you want to make sure you're being realistic about what it's going to take for you to get into and out of these activities. And if there's time, you're really not realistically allotting to it. You also have to then consider during your day, you know, out of that, you're going to get a total number of, you know, hours or minutes of stuff you have to, of work you think you can get done. But you're really going to have to look at your day, and you have to think in terms of, okay, well, if I take out time for lunch, and again, you know, if I leave and I've got to come back, how long does that whole block take? If I've got to drop off kids at school, if I got to pick up kids afterwards, if I've got a prescription I need to pick up, you know, all of those little things that, you know, I walk a dog 3 to 4 times a day. That's an hour of my day, you know, and I have to take that into consideration. An hour of my day, I'm going to walk a dog. And there's just getting ready for the day and into the day. You know, you have to consider how much time do you realistically have to work when the ordinary items of life, once you do those things and you consider the on and off time, what you're going to find is you've usually way over planned your work. And that said, then once you know you've over planned your work, it becomes a matter of saying, well, okay, how many of these things can I realistically get done? And you have to take some of this stuff and say, you know what, that's going to have to be on hold until Wednesday, or that piece is going to have to be on hold till Thursday. You know, I call that segmenting, where I go through my list and I say, I'm pulling this off for today, but I am setting it aside for a specific period. And it's amazing how psychologically freeing it is to just go through and take these things and say, you know what, I'm not realistically going to get through that today. I don't want to forget it. This is when I'll give time and attention to it. And then you can breathe a little bit easier. And if you do this, what'll happen is you're eventually going to get that list of 25 things down to 12 or 15. When you first start doing this, I'll be honest, it's a little bit anxiety inducing because you're used to having all this stuff on your list. And honestly, I think we wear that list almost like a badge of honor. You know, how many people go, oh, I'm so busy, you know, and we almost wear it like a badge of honor. It's not a badge of honor to be walking around busy with too much stuff to do. And I think we feel like we're not being enough. We get guilt on ourselves when we don't feel like we've, you know, got enough staring us in the face. But what we really need to do is we need to realistically place that in a spot where we can attend to it and give us our time and attention properly. It will be anxiety inducing at first when you do that. At first, you'll also probably not estimate very well, but the more you practice this, the better you'll get at it. One thing you can do is, and I don't do this regularly, but Allyson's done it, and it's really helped her. And when I have done it, it's helped me, is not only write down your estimated time, but when you finish a task, write down how long it took you. Allyson did here's an experiment you can try with yourself. For those of you who want to go the extra mile, anybody wants bonus points, okay? Big gold star. Here's an exercise Allyson did recently that was very revealing, and I have not tried it yet. She created her list and her estimated time she thought it would take. Then when she started working on those tasks, she set a timer for her estimated time. And when it went off, she then started a stopwatch until she finished, so that she mechanically was told when her estimated time was done. And with a stopwatch, she tracked how long it actually took. And she did that one day, and it was incredibly revealing, she found. You wouldn't have to do that many. I need to try it. I have to confess, I haven't done it yet, but I'm really intrigued by it. All right, where are we? 11:57. I'm going to need to shift into question mode here. Not that I haven't been available for questions throughout, but has this been, let's just let me back up a little bit. I talked about prioritizing in terms of we need to know our highest priorities. We need to know our purpose and our goals. And we do that before we have a list. So we have that as a filter to make choices about what's going to go to the top of our list. Then we create our list. And once we have a list, we can, knowing that, go in and find 5 actions that are high value meaning they bring meaning or they produce results, and put those before everything else, knowing that, okay, yes, it's a little nerve-wracking to put that other stuff aside and say, when am I going to get to it? Realizing that 5 things, if they're really at a task level, are not going to take an outrageous amount of time. It may take 30 minutes to an hour, tops an hour and a half. And then also understanding that if you do that over time, it will produce a sense of accomplishment, and that sense of accomplishment turns into extra energy and focus that helps you bang these things out more productively, and it lifts you out of that place of wanting to procrastinate everything because you don't feel as overwhelmed. So that's kind of prioritizing in a nutshell. Organizing, what we really talked about in terms of organizing is making sure you have everything by and large in one place, so you're not living in scraps of pieces of paper here, there, and everywhere, and simplifying going through and getting down to what is realistic. What is realistic? And if you do nothing else out of this, focus on that 5 before 11 and until it becomes habitual. And focus on making sure everything's at a task level until that's habitual. Those are really the things that that make the dramatic difference over the long haul. At least they have been for me. So I got to get a little more tea in me. My throat's really, this hour of talking's really worn me down. If we don't have a lot of questions, it may wrap up kind of early. All right, while I'm waiting for questions, hey Jill, right before you leave real quick, let me drop a link here. I want to tell you about something that I'm doing real quickly. Grab this link, boom. There's a little Google link. Guys, I'll interject this before anybody has to bow off, and then we might cut it a little short if we don't have a lot of questions. In a couple weeks here, I am also the author of a blog called The Practical Disciple, and I've been talking with Allyson about the fact that I have wanted to take some of the tools that we do and blend them with what I do over there. I am a pastor, and that's all tips and tools for people living in their faith. And I have wanted to, for a long time, to create a challenge for people to help them identify their life purpose in 5 days. And I'm going to be doing that over on my website. And with Allyson's permission, I just want to tell you a word about it real quickly. That link will take you to a place where you can get on a notification list. And sometime in mid-May, I'm working out a few technical details, so I haven't nailed down the exact day I'll start. I'm going to do a challenge where every day for 5 days, I will send you an email to a post that has a very simple, 10, 15-minute exercise. It may take even less than that for some of you, but 10 or 15-minute exercise. The first 3 days, you will be exploring and discovering 3 pieces of what makes for a very meaningful purpose statement. A purpose statement that ignites your passions, it fuels your gifts, it unleashes what you love to do around what you're concerned about to make a difference. And so each day we'll hit on a different element of what makes for a rock solid purpose in life. On the 4th day, I hand you a very simple formula to where you can write a clear, concise purpose statement for your life that can give it direction. It can help you make decisions. It can help you start leveraging your gifts so that you're getting things done in the day where you go, that really meant something and I can see it made a difference. Then on the 5th day, I'm going to kind of leave that as a surprise, because on the 4th day, you'll now know your purpose. And on the 5th day, I'll kind of lay out a trajectory of now knowing your purpose. It's 5th day is kind of, now what? Okay, I know my purpose, now what? So I'm going to be doing that mid-May. If anybody wants to join me on that, just use that Google link. And this will be something, it's not a 7-minute life project per se. This is something I'm doing through my blog, The Practical Disciple. But it's something that Allyson's really supportive of, and it really weds many of the principles of the 7-minute life with trying to kind of identify what our God-given purpose is. I am a pastor, and some of that I may throw in some biblical illustrations and things like that. I think anybody will find this valuable, but I'll throw that out there. My site is a discipleship site. So I don't want to, this is not like a bait and switch or something like that, or proselytizing or anything. But I know some of you will want to go through that purpose process with me. And so I just put that out there as an invite, and you can go over to that link and come join me there. And can somebody let me know if that link came through and worked? If they could drop it in their browser or click on it, I want to make sure. Okay, thank you, Samantha. Appreciate it. Let's see what kind of questions we have. I mean, I'll really go wide open here with you for, we've got 25 minutes. If we don't have a lot of questions, I'll probably wrap this up early because my throat's really starting to wear out on me. But listen, I am totally open to going until 12:30 for anybody who wants help. And you don't have to, restrict it to what we talked about today in terms of prioritize, organize, and simplify. Any of your time management battles you're having right now around goals, listen, I'm here for you right now, and feel free to take advantage of that. Anybody? And Jill, thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you soon again in another webinar. All right, let's see if we have questions. And if you don't have questions, let me know, like all good, or give me some feedback here. Let me ask you this before we get off, for those of you who are still left. Looks like you're starting to bow out because I'm thinking we don't have some questions. What's one thing you learned today that you're going to apply? I can teach this all day long. Unless you apply it and run with it, that's where it makes a difference. Unless you do that, it's not going to make a difference in your life. Anybody got one thing they learned today that they're going to try to apply? Because it's really just, I would start with one simple strategy. All right, not seeing anything? I'm okay. The visual I drew at the beginning really made things clear in my head. It's a visual prompt that makes it seem so easy if I just do it. Well, thank you, Samantha. That actually came to me this morning right before the call. For those of you who came in after it, I drew a little guy with all these papers above him because I looked up what it meant to be overwhelmed. And the word overwhelmed, all of the definitions have to do with having things piled on us and having too much piled on top of us. And the whole idea of today's webinar was to help us get a sense of how do we, first off, invert that picture so that we're on top of our task instead of our task on top of us. And secondly, how do we whittle it down to something doable and manageable, not some frightening paper monster that's piled on top of it. Okay, yes, visual, great. Nice to know. Oops, stand by. Okay. Thanks for the recommend on the T. Not alone. Good. That's a lot of just being here in this community. It really helps us to know that we're not alone in the struggle. All right. One last call on questions. And if there are not any, give me a thumbs up that you're ready to go. Okay, Samantha, thank you, John, for joining this webinar. Even though you weren't feeling well, you offered amazing information. Thank you. I'm grateful for you guys. Ab, thank you as well. Thank everybody. Let's call it quits then. I'm going to wrap it up. You're welcome, Melissa. And I'll see you again soon. And hopefully I'll see some of you in the 5-Minute Purpose Challenge in mid-May. Bye now. Everybody have a fantastic week. Oh, Ab, thank you for mentioning it. Permission to do 20 minutes and to have a break. Yeah, put that to work and let me know how it goes. It's really, really helpful. I need to save chat before we get out of here. All right. Bye now, everybody.